my 11-year-old daughter. Sophie worked her heart out to win the elite Evergreen Scholarship. But to the wealthy Karens of the PTA, she was just a stain on their prestige. When they planted stolen exams in her locker to get her expelled, they thought I'd just cry and walk away. They forgot one thing: a mother's eyes see everything. Watch how a hidden analog camera and a waitress's determination exposed the biggest scandal in the state and brought an entire empire of frauds to its knees. This isn't just a story about a scholarship. It's about what happens when you try to crush a child's dream. My daughter, Sophie, is the kind of girl who reads biology textbooks for fun. At 11 years old, she has a brain that works like a Swiss watch. We live in a small apartment above a noisy laundromat. But Sophie's dreams were always mansion-sized. When she won the prestigious Evergreen Excellence Scholarship to the most elite private school in the state, I cried for 3 days. It was her ticket out of poverty. It was her chance to be someone. I remember the first day I dropped her off. I was wearing my waitress uniform because I had to rush to my double shift. The other moms were stepping out of black SUVs worth more than my life. They looked at my old rusted sedan like it was a pile of trash. One woman, Mrs. Sterling, stood out. She was the queen bee of the PTA. Her daughter, Chloe, had lost the scholarship to Sophie. As Sophie walked toward the gate with her backpack standing tall, Mrs. Sterling leaned over to her friend and whispered loud enough for me to hear that. Street rats don't belong in ivory towers. I ignored it. I told Sophie to keep her head down and her grades up. For 3 months, she did exactly that. She was topping every class. But the higher she climbed, the bigger the target on her back became. The elite parents couldn't handle the fact that a girl from the wrong side of the tracks was smarter than their legacy kids. I started noticing Sophie coming home quiet. Her bright blue eyes looked tired. She told me the girls called her the janitor's charity case. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. I was at work when I got the call. The principal's voice was cold and formal. He told me there had been a serious academic integrity violation. Said Sophie had been caught with the final exam papers for the semester in her locker before the test even started. My heart dropped into my stomach. I knew my daughter. She would rather fail than cheat. When I arrived at the school, Sophie was sitting in a hard wooden chair outside the office. She wasn't crying. She was shaking. She looked at me and whispered that she didn't do it. I knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and told her I knew. I saw Mrs. Sterling standing by the water fountain, smirking. She had won. Or so she thought. The meeting inside the principal's office was a circus. Mr. Henderson, the principal, laid out the evidence like he was a prosecutor. He showed me a printed stack of the advanced mathematics exam found tucked inside Sophie's history notebook. He said a concerned student had reported seeing Sophie sneaking into the faculty lounge. That student was Chloe Sterling. I asked to see the security footage of the hallway. Mr. Henderson sighed and told me the cameras in that specific corridor were undergoing maintenance that afternoon. How convenient. Mrs. Sterling was invited into the room because she was the Board of Governors representative. She sat there in her Chanel suit, smelling like expensive perfume and fake sympathy. She said it was such a shame that a girl with so much potential felt the need to steal because she couldn't keep up with the rigorous standards of a real school. She suggested that Sophie be expelled immediately to protect the prestige of the institution. Sophie finally broke. She started sobbing, explaining that she had never even been to the faculty lounge. She told them she had been in the library tutoring another student. But when the principal called that student, the boy lied. He said Sophie never showed up. It was a coordinated strike. They had bought everyone. I watched my daughter's spirit break in that room. The scholarship was revoked on the spot. We were given 1 hour to clear her locker. As we walked down the hallway, students were whispering and pointing. "Cheater," they hissed. I held Sophie's hand so tight my knuckles turned white. As we reached the exit, Mrs. Sterling caught up to us. She leaned in close to me and whispered that people like us should learn our place. She said Sophie was a stain on the school's reputation that had finally been bleached out. I didn't scream. I didn't hit her. I looked at her perfectly manicured face and I realized something. People like her think they are untouchable because they have money. But people like me survive because we know how to work. I told Sophie to go to the car. I had one more stop to make. I went to the janitor's closet. The head janitor, Mr. Silas, had been a regular at my diner for years. I knew he hated these entitled parents as much as I did. I asked him if the cameras were really broken. He looked at me, chewed his gum, and said the digital ones were, but the old analog backup in the ceiling vent still ran on a separate loop. He gave me a wink. I spent the next 48 hours in a dark room with a laptop. I borrowed from the public library and a USB drive Silas gave me. I wasn't just looking for the person who framed Sophie. I wanted blood. If they wanted to talk about integrity, I was going to show them what that word actually meant. I watched hours of grainy footage. Around 3:15 p.m. on Monday, I saw her. It wasn't Chloe Sterling. It was Mrs. Sterling herself. She had used a master key, likely from her board position, to slip into the faculty lounge. She came out with papers under her coat. 5 minutes later, she was at Sophie's locker. The footage was clear enough to see her face. But I didn't stop there. I knew a woman like that didn't just cheat once. I started digging into the school's digital grade portal. Since I had worked in IT before the diner, I knew how to look for footprints. I spent the night tracking IP addresses and login timestamps. What I found was a goldmine. It turns out Chloe Sterling wasn't just a bully. She was failing 3 subjects. Or she should have been. Every Sunday night, someone was logging into the system using an administrative bypass to change Chloe's C grades to A+ marks. The trail led directly to Mrs. Sterling's home network. It wasn't just Chloe. There were 4 other kids, all children of the wealthiest. Donors whose grades were being digitally inflated. They were a pack of frauds. They were accusing my daughter of cheating to hide the fact that their own children were incapable of passing a basic test. I found emails. I found deleted chat logs where these elite moms joked about how easy it was to manipulate the system. They talked about Sophie like she was an insect they needed to crush. My anger turned into a cold, sharp blade. I printed everything. I made copies. I put them in bright red folders. Sophie saw me working and asked if we were going to the police. I told her no. The police handle crimes, but I was going to handle a revolution. I told her to put on her best dress. We were going to the Annual Founders Gala on Friday night, the very event where they were going to announce the new scholarship recipient, a sea of tuxedos and silk gowns. Security tried to stop me at the door since I wasn't on the list. I simply held up a folder and told the guard that if he didn't let me in, the local news station would be here in 10 minutes to discuss the security breach I had discovered. He let us through. The ballroom was stunning, filled with the scent of lilies and arrogance. Mrs. Sterling was center stage, holding a glass of champagne, laughing with the principal. They were about to announce that Chloe had miraculously qualified for the scholarship. Sophie had lost. I waited. I waited until the principal stood behind the microphone. He started his speech about excellence and the high moral fiber of their students. He mentioned how they had recently cleansed the school of a dishonest element. That was my cue. I didn't run. I walked slowly down the center aisle, Sophie by my side. The room went silent. Mrs. Sterling's face turned a ghostly shade of white. Before the principal could speak, I reached the stage and plugged my own thumb drive into the laptop connected to the giant projector screens behind him. "I think you have the wrong presentation," I said into the second microphone. Suddenly, the grainy footage of Mrs. Sterling planting the papers in Sophie's locker filled the 20-foot screens. The gasp from the crowd was like a physical wave. But I wasn't done. I hit next. The screen showed the grade logs. It showed Chloe's real grades versus her fake ones. It showed the names of the other 3 donors, children who were cheating their way through school. The room erupted. Parents whose kids had actually worked hard were screaming. The donors whose kids were exposed tried to run for the stage. I stood my ground. I turned to the crowd and asked how it felt to know that their elite education was a lie bought and sold by a woman who framed an 11-year-old girl. Sophie stood tall next to me. She wasn't shaking anymore. She was watching her monsters crumble. The fallout was nuclear. By Monday morning, the principal had resigned in disgrace. Mrs. Sterling was not only kicked off the board, but the school's legal team filed a lawsuit against her for fraud and tampering with private records. The local news picked up the story, and the scholarship frame became the biggest scandal in the city's history. The other parents who were involved were forced to withdraw their children. The school board issued a public televised apology to Sophie. They offered her the scholarship back, along with a full ride for her entire high school career and a stipend for books and supplies, but we didn't take it. I looked at Sophie and asked her what she wanted. She told me she didn't want to go back to a place that let her be bullied for 3 months before anyone listened. We used the settlement money from our defamation lawsuit against Mrs. Sterling to move to a beautiful neighborhood in the city. Sophie is now attending a specialized science academy where the kids don't care about what brand of shoes you wear. She is happy. She is thriving. As for the Sterlings, they had to sell their mansion to pay for their legal fees. I heard Mrs. Sterling is working as a receptionist at a low-end law firm now. The irony is delicious. One day, I was driving past the old diner where I used to work, and I saw her. She looked tired. She looked broken. She saw my car, a brand new, safe SUV, and our eyes met for a second. I didn't feel hate anymore. I felt nothing. I had protected my daughter. I had cleared her name. And most importantly, Sophie learned that a mother's love is the most dangerous thing on earth if you try to hurt her child. We drove away, leaving the ghosts of that elite world in the rearview mirror. Sophie turned up the radio and started explaining a new physics theory to me. Life was finally loud, bright, and honest.